Again, my name is Marisol Morales. I'm the Vice President for Network Leadership at Campus Compact. I started back in February, and my background in this work, first, as a student, I went to DePaul University in Chicago. That's where I'm from, so born and raised, and through a course that I took at the university that required us to engage with the community is what my first introduction really was to this work. And that course, if I sort of trace the trajectory of my career, I can trace it back to that course and how much it impacted me in my own identity development as a Puerto Rican woman, but also as someone who is connected to the community. And I really believe in the transformational power of service learning and community engagement for our students, as well as have my own critiques about the work and how we can continue to make it better. I was a community partner as well. I worked with several universities to host service learners and create meaningful experiences for them as they were doing community service at my agency. And then in 2005, I joined DePaul University at the Stain Center for Community-Based Service Learning and Community Service Studies, first as the Assistant Director for Community Development. So my role was really working on university community partnerships, and then about a year later, I became the Associate Director, and I was at the Stain Center for 8 years in total. I left in 2013 to become the founding director of the Office of Civic and Community Engagement at the University of La Verne, which is located in Southern California, so that's how I made my way out there. And so I was in that role of director for about 4.5 years before I joined Compact. So, really what I'm going to be sharing with you today is just sort of the experiences that I've had being a student, community partner, and a community engagement professional. And hopefully, this will be more of a conversation. You all represent sort of different types of educational levels, so I want to make sure that I also share, what can be more applicable to the level of students that you're working with. And what I will introduce to you is just one of, a variety of ways that, community engagement and service learning happens at the institutions. So this presentation I originally designed when I was at the University of La Verne, and I've adjusted it, but I will make some references to some things that I think really help to support community engagement, especially for faculty on that campus. And I've had the good fortune at both institutions, DePaul being a large, urban, faith-based institution with undergraduate, graduate, and non-traditional adult students, having worked with a variety of different student types. And then at the University of La Verne being a smaller private institution, but also with a variety of different student types. So, again, from traditional undergrads to graduate students to non-traditional students, and having helped develop community engagement projects for doctoral students, master's level students, online students. So I feel really blessed in having that different experience. And if there's questions along the way, definitely we can stop and have those conversations. I want to apologize up front because I think there will be some slides that you can't read, so I might read them to you, but you will get copies of those. And then there's a slide that does have the list of publications, and we've got that as a handout for you. So Campus Compact, we talked a little bit about it, but we're a network of over 1,000 universities and colleges from across the country that really helps to support the public purposes of higher education. And I think for me, as someone who was on the sort of director side, both in 2 states, what I found was that as a professional in this field, Campus Compact really helped me to develop my knowledge base and provide that connection with other professionals from across the state. And particularly in California, where our director there is very intentional about the type of professional development that we've received and the relationships that happen between and amongst community engagement directors, I have found that the opportunities to both present and expand my work has really come through avenues that Campus Compact has provided. So I was really excited to join the Compact in my new role, which is to support our directors from across the country, but also to help develop and support our work around diversity, equity, and inclusion within the network. So what we do as a network of all of these different state and regional compacts, and then with our member institutions as we begin to really think about the integration of diversity, equity, and inclusion with the work that we're doing around community engagement. All right. So I'm going to talk a little bit about definitions and the philosophy of engagement. As a, having the luxury of founding a center from the ground up was wonderful because I could sort of create what I wanted, right? So really use the experiences that I had from my previous institution and then move that forward in my new institution. And as we were thinking about definitions, right, because we always have to define the work, I really liked the definition that the Carnegie Foundation came up with. And so as the University of Laverne, we really use this to frame our community engagement. And I think it's a very comprehensive definition of community engagement. So in all of the materials that I developed and that we had on the website, we would include this definition. And so, the collaboration between institutions of higher education and their larger communities for the mutually beneficial exchange of knowledge and resources in the context of partnership and reciprocity. For me, I think the piece that's most important is this idea of reciprocity, and really how do we bring it in from the beginning? How do we make sure that it is present as we develop our relationships with the community and how we invite them in? And I think for the other piece, in my own sort of work as a community partner, I was lucky to be in a community that really understood its power in relation to the university. And so we were really able to check the university in many cases around the ways that it wanted to enter the community and make sure that the ways that it entered were beneficial for us as a community. But that came after many years of struggle. I come from a community where DePaul was the university that displaced the Puerto Rican community in Chicago, so the area where DePaul is currently located. And so there was always a sort of contentious history between DePaul and the Puerto Rican community. And having gone there and then sort of being on the community side when they wanted to come in and do, send students there, it was a questionable relationship at first. And then through the years, how that was able to transform. And part of it was DePaul acknowledging its role in the displacement and gentrification that took place. And then what that meant for us as we were sharing our experiences in the new community that we were in. And then I think this part is really important, especially now, right? This idea of prepare educated, engaged citizens, strengthen democratic values and civic responsibility, address critical societal issues, and contribute to the public good. Now more than ever, I think we really need to look at what the public purposes are, thinking about how we educate folks in a new era. So I think digital civic literacy is very important and something that we need to work on developing more. How do we sort through all of the media that we're getting, and then also being able to engage in civil discourse, opportunities to understand different points of view, and what our civic responsibility is. So thinking about voting rates, voter participation, and how that changes over time, particularly with this generation and the use of social media. And for institutions that take a long time we're not very agile as universities in responding to things. So then how does the work that we do as community engagement professionals facilitate some sort of agility within the institution so that we can also meet the needs of our students and our communities? At Laverne, it was really important for me to also put out what our philosophy of engagement was. And this was particularly both for the community as well as for the faculty that we were working with. I come from a tradition at DePaul where we subscribe to the asset-based community development model that came out of Northwestern University, Jody Kretzmann and John McKnight. And it very much aligned with the way the community that I worked in and was a part of sort of saw itself and saw the assets. And this model talks about how do you see the glass half empty or half full? So when we're looking at communities, typically it's a very deficit-minded model that we see, right? The dropout rates, the crime, all of these things, the negative. But we don't always look from the lens of what are the assets in the community and how can those be mobilized to address the challenges. And Laverne is a Hispanic serving institution with about 35% Latino students, about 60% students of color. And for me, coming into that environment, if we continued with a deficits perspective, this is the lens that we were putting on the communities that our students came from. So inadvertently, we were putting it on them. And that's why one of the first things we did was really define our philosophy of engagement. And I'll just read this. We utilize an asset-based community development model as our framework for community engagement. This model informs our development and operation of partnerships. We see community as co-educators. ABCD ensures that we utilize an appreciative lens when working with the community, recognizing the gifts, talents, and abilities of community members. This model helps to keep in check traditional power dynamics between the university and the community, since we see ourselves as an asset that the community can mobilize for its benefit. Developing and maintaining mutually beneficial and reciprocal relationships with our community partners informs our interactions. This is something that we would share with faculty, with students, with community partners, and the way that we framed our work to operate in a way that also sort of called out the power dynamics that are always in play. And I think we trained hundreds of students in this ABCD model, thinking about I would do an exercise with students, asking them to identify 3 communities that were by us. Laverne, the city that the university lives in, Pomona, which is a more sort of metropolitan city, high immigrant population, and high diversity, and then Claremont, which is where the Claremont colleges are. 3 very different, right? And so when I would ask them, tell me the first sort of adjectives that come to your mind, when you think of these 3 cities, right? So for Pomona, it would be all of the negative, the gangs, the drugs, immigration, all of these things. And then Claremont and Laverne would have different, Claremont is very affluent, a lot of professors, and Laverne is as well. And so it helped them to see some of the biases that they had around those communities and then think about them differently, because we said, did you know that actually Pomona was the city that helped to promote driver's licenses for undocumented, and they actually took it from their local community because of the stops that were happening and the arrests that were happening with the undocumented, and helped push state legislation so we could have driver's license across the state for the undocumented. Did you know that Pomona did, right? All of these things that they never associated with Pomona. And so really sort of thinking about the lens that they brought into this work and how that challenged their perceptions. And the idea behind the ABCD model is that, it's not that problems don't exist or you're sweeping them under the rug, but what we're doing is really taking a look at it from a different perspective and saying the skills and talents and abilities that these community members have can address those issues, but they can't if we're only looking at it from a negative perspective. And so I think for a lot of students, this changed the way they entered communities. And for the students that were from those communities, it affirmed all of the things that they loved about their communities. And actually, they were able to speak up. I don't see that in you may have that perception, but I don't see that in my neighborhood. I actually see X, Y, and Z. And as our universities are diversifying, I think this model is really important to bring into the conversation to help us begin to address the biases and negative sort of perceptions we have, particularly of those communities that have been most marginalized. Any questions about this? Mm-hmm.
Wait, you talked about you using this when you talk to students, I assume community partners. Are there in faculty? Do you include that as well with your faculty communications?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we would train them on the ABCD model. I have a whole nother training on ABCD that I would do with faculty and with students. With the students, we do a couple of different things. There's a great TED Talk by Angela Bitlanter, who works out of Neighborhood Partners Inc. in Houston, who really goes through this wonderful story about the ABCD model and how you see communities differently. We'd have them do like a human knot exercise to think about, like, if this is a community issue, like, right, and then what do you need to sort of untangle, right, and the complexities around that. And so also pointing out that if we're only relying on sort of media accounts, we know that crime in Black and brown communities are disproportionately reported than other communities. So that's already a bias that comes into play as we're thinking about certain neighborhoods. And so, you know, in some ways it's very simple, but it's a reminder that we oftentimes operate from a deficits perspective, and so if we come from an appreciative perspective, that opens up a whole other set of possibilities, right? And the point around these interactions and this community engagement is about opening up possibilities. And so I have found this rather effective. The Asset-Based Community Development Institute used to be at Northwestern. Now it's housed at DePaul University at the Stain Center. And so they're doing a lot more work around ABCD and expanding the kind of training and development that they're doing for in the city of Chicago, but also across the country. Any other questions about ABCD?
So is this something you try to make it applicable?
Yeah.
We're like very new. We have no idea what we're doing. So is this something like, say, okay, I have a bunch of residents, and one of the projects we're kind of thinking about is working with Ship and Rejuvenating Women. Rejuvenating Women, their focus is on helping victims of human trafficking, and then Ship, they work with fostering kids. So then one of the things we're thinking is maybe we'll just go to like health checkups or something basic. So would you say before we do that, let's do a talk about what Ship is about, and then send them off to go do their, blood pressure screening, or, I mean, how do we integrate this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always important for us as institutions to prepare our students, right? Because one, we don't want to be in a place where we're reinforcing stereotypes. And two, I think that it's important for us to also have our students understand the nuances, right, in community, and that oftentimes certain communities are painted with one brush, right? So the victims of human trafficking are maybe painted with a certain brush, and thinking about, like, what did it take for them to leave, or be survivors, and the power that they have. So it's not a poor you.
Victim
Right.
And maybe look at it from this is actually a strong thing.
Right, and what it has taken for them to get out of it. And so I always think it's important for us as institutions to prepare our students before they go out. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. One of the things that we used to do at DePaul was have our community partners come out to campus the day that we were doing like placement. So students were selecting the sites that they were going to go to, so the community partner could speak directly to the work that they do, and then the opportunities that the students could participate in. We could always run a video or say it, but it was more powerful coming directly from the community partner about the work that they were doing. So I think that prep piece is really important in order to frame it. And also to, I always used to say to students, you are representatives of the university while you are out in the community. You need to act professionally, respectfully. You need to follow the rules of the organization as well as any, right? Because, of course, I used to run a program for young moms who had dropped out of high school and came back to get their high school diploma, we would have college students come. And, there was sometimes a lot of flirting taking place, or, so there were, a few male students that I had to tell DePaul that they needed to take back because, right? And it wasn't just the guys from the university, like my girls were also, but I could take care of them. So, right, but you always want to make sure that you're preparing the students before they go out, especially if it's the same kind of work we expect in IRBs when you're thinking about vulnerable populations. That work that you do even before you start doing your research is that prep, like our IRB has researchers do. So being able to frame it, I think, is important. And then also, as you're beginning, thinking about the values that you want this program to have, right? Those are conversations that you have to have. For me, I was at institutions that were values-based, and the values were something that we talked about on a regular basis, and the way that we also framed our work. And so thinking about what is your university's mission, what are your university values, and how do you develop the framework for your engagement that is aligned with that. I think it makes it more powerful. I want to talk a little bit, well, let me go back. Are there any other questions about the ABC D model? They have a book called Building Communities from the Inside Out, and it has a bunch of different exercises, but one of the, I think, most powerful pieces of that is the asset map that takes place, and often I would have students do that as an exercise to think about, like, what are the institutions within the community that are important, or interviewing someone from the community and finding out what their skills, talents, and abilities are, right? And how those contribute or could contribute to the community. Also having students do it themselves, right? Them thinking about the assets that they bring, right? I think oftentimes we can say all the things that we suck at. It's a bit harder to sort of say the things that we're good at, and thinking about how we can share that with others. And that's part of what this helps frame us to do, because if I can identify assets in myself, then I can also then help identify assets in other people. I want to talk a little bit about the scholarship of engagement. This comes out of work from Ernest Boyer, who's the president of the Carnegie Foundation. And in 1990, 1996, he wrote a book called Scholarship Reconsidered, and really thinking about the role of scholarship in higher ed, and that it had more of a purpose than just discovery of knowledge, right? But also looked at integration. And, we use this a lot as we're talking about tenure and promotion for faculty, and thinking about what counts and how we can expand what universities sort of define as counting towards tenure and promotion. The University of Arizona has done really good work on inclusive scholarship, and so really using this model, and also identifying, grants or other types of scholarly activities that can count towards tenure and promotion. But a lot of that comes out of, I think, the work that Ernest Boyer did in sort of having us rethink what we use to count for scholarship. So the scholarship engagement means connecting the rich resources of the university to our most pressing social, civic, and ethical problems, to our children, to our schools, to our teachers, to our cities. And so really the responsibility that higher ed has, that our scholarship has, in not just producing knowledge that will, sit in some book in the library that nobody reads, but really has the ability to be applicable to our current situation. And when we think about the scholarship engagement, we think about it involving the community, it benefiting the community, and it also enhancing academic scholarship. And so through this work, you can sort of do it all. For Boyer, he talked about, just not going beyond the discovery piece, as we sort of oftentimes have our research do. Discovery is the pursuit of inquiry and investigation in the search of new knowledge. That we sort of historically put on faculty as what their role is. but really thinking about integration, so making the connections across disciplines and advancing knowledge through synthesis, engagement, which is what we do, the application piece, the idea of theory to practice, right? And how do our spaces help connect that? We know this to be a high impact practice for students. It is also, I think, a high impact practice for faculty who engage in this work. You had a question? No? Okay. So for Boyer, engagement was asking how the knowledge can be applied to the social issues of the times in a dynamic process that generates and tests new theories and knowledge. So it's beyond sort of the discovery piece, but how can we integrate it into other disciplines, connect it to other disciplines? How can we have it be applicable to the current situations that our society is experiencing? And then how do we transmit that knowledge? How do we teach it in such a way that it becomes transformative, that it extends beyond the classroom and into the community? I think his work really helped to push forward this field, and particularly around faculty and faculty development. Many of the pioneers in this field, went through hell trying to get this sort of recognized as legitimate scholarship, right? And so a lot of sort of the current journals that we see, IRSLICE, the International Association for Research and Service Learning Community Engagement, has a journal. There's other journals, the Michigan Journal for Community Service, developed as a vehicle to really give legitimacy to the faculty who are really putting their necks on the line doing this work, risking promotion and tenure, risking sort of their positions at the university, challenging the status quo by taking this and making it a central part. And so I think the importance of Campus Compact in its formation was that it came out of presidents acknowledging that this is legitimate, that this is actually our role in helping transform their institutions to go beyond the discovery piece. Are there any questions? So that's just some background. And then when we think about engaged scholarship, this is the idea of scholarship that involves the faculty in partnership with the community. So community engaged scholarship can be transdisciplinary, integrates multiple forms of scholarship. It can be service learning, right? And you're doing research on what your experience as a faculty member is in doing this work. It can be community-based participatory action research. So there's a variety of different types of community-engaged scholarship, but thinking about this as a tool for faculty who really want to align what their interest is in the community with what they have to do, research, teaching, and service. And so community-engaged scholarship helps to bring that together. And this happens both through sort of academic service learning and community-based research in the integration of engaged scholarship. All right, so background. So we'll move to the pedagogy piece. I love this sort of picture because I think that oftentimes this is the problem that we have, right? It's the banking model where we're here, kind of like I'm doing right now, but right, just dumping information in, and moving to the generative model where we're kind of working on projects together, to the transformative model where we're actually doing it, right, and connecting that theory to practice piece. And this is where ideally, right, we want to go with our teaching, and this is where I think service learning helps to push some of the boundaries of this. Yeah.
So, can you just give steps? Basically, my question is, can we just start off transforming it at the top level, or is it's essential before we get there that there is some kind of transmission, and then some kind of generative that's brainstorm, and then transformative? Because the struggle I'm having, I'm a doer. Like, I just want to go do,
Yeah.
I want our organization to start doing it, but I'm starting to realize that's great and the energy's good, but if you have no sound, basic knowledge, us, we have no idea what we're doing, then is it just wasted energy and effort because we want to do things, but we don't really understand like the basics, the building block, and we haven't even really like brainstormed what we're going to do. We can't just go do it, which is what I want to do.
Yeah.
I'm starting to think maybe we should follow the steps. It's painful, and go through it, but it looks like maybe. What's your opinion on that?
I think that as also a doer, I think it's one thing to be a doer as an individual and go in. I think it's another thing to be a doer or try to be a doer as an institution, because there's a whole set of other sort of baggage that you bring into that. And it's not like, remember the movie The Gremlins? And like you had the one really nice gremlin who got in, but then the others got wet and that became like crazy gremlins. Like you risk your institution being that crazy gremlin if you're not doing the work, I think, at the beginning to kind of set the parameters of it. Oftentimes I would see myself as a gatekeeper to the community with the institution, because I don't think every faculty should do community engagement. I think that some will do more damage than good, and so part of, I think, the responsibility of community engagement professionals, offices, is to help figure out who are the best sort of candidates to be able to. I don't know what's happening. Remind me tomorrow. I think who are the best candidates to be able to do it, and then be able to train those and give them the background. So I do think, just like we need to prepare students to do this work so they're not reinforcing stereotypes, I think we need to do the work with faculty as well so they're not doing it. And you need to think about engagement for what end, right? Why? Is it the community being a laboratory? Well, if it is, then they're being used. If it is for transformation, then the community has to be part of that discussion. I can't come in and say, I'm going to transform you, right? First, you have to say that you're open to that, and then I can say, this is how I can probably help, right? And that's, I think, where the framing, and particularly where the ABCD model comes in, because, we are not the ones who are going to go transform communities. We are just an asset that they can mobilize. We are here to support you. I would often tell my community partners, we're here to support you in any way you need us, right? And I can tell you tell me you need something, and I can tell you whether or not it's possible, because I have limitations myself as an institution, right? As our institution, we have limitations. And so that conversation is really essential. So you can't just show up. You can't parachute in, can't show up, because you may already be operating on some contentious territory between the university and the community, depending on what the history was, like DePaul, right? There's a very contentious history there between the Puerto Rican community and DePaul. And so we have to tread, I think, delicately, and part of it is thinking about our positionality and the power dynamics that exist.
One thing we were thinking about here, and I think that this too, is thinking about it as scaffolding, so that you have entry points, which may not put as much emphasis on that bottom piece. You may just want to get students out there to get a taste of that experience, to do things at a fairly low level in terms of what they need to bring to as an asset. And then you can think about how you move from that to something that involves the development of some expertise, some preparation. Imagine with doctors, you're talking about some probably fairly extensive tools where the transmission piece is important.
Right.
And so in that model, then you really are getting into this sort of scaling of transmission centers. But I think thinking about it scaffolded too gives an idea of how you might do it by, you might be able to circumvent some at transmission level, although always sensitive to what students need to know in order to go out and do it appropriately.
Absolutely. And it's not like in our classrooms we just do this, it's one at a time and we close the door on it. Sometimes it's all three in the same, right? But I think the piece of it is, like, the goal for education should be transformative, right? But that doesn't mean that these don't have some role in it, right? We can't have the flowers unless we have the roots. So thinking about that a little bit more intentionally. The scaffolding piece, I'm a big proponent of. I helped our, this is before I left DePaul, but our school nursing is a graduate school of nursing at DePaul, and they wanted to embed community engagement through their two-year master's program. And what we did was, they had a very sort of strict set of curriculum they used over the 2 years, and the way we developed this program was scaffolding. So we took one course every quarter that students were going to do, and had that one course be a service learning course or community engagement course. And we identified community partners that they would be at for the 2 years. And so the first kind of set of experiences was just getting to know the agency, maybe doing some, helping them out with the events that they had. But the idea was that they were going to develop that relationship with the organization over the 2 years, and by the end, when they had to do their research project, they would have enough of a relationship and background with the community that they could actually build their research project in partnership with the community partner that they were hosted at. And that's been successful. I mean, it takes a few years to sort of get the kinks out, but they're running that program. I want to say this is probably the 5th year that they've been into this program, and it's gotten stronger over the years. But I do believe scaffolding is the way to go. I think with traditional undergrads, things like, I'm not a big proponent of service days, but I think those are a good way to sort of have that initial exposure. Some community partners love that because that's the day they get their halls painted and their stock rooms cleaned out, and that's fine, and that's what they identify that they need. But that's an initial exposure, and we ask the community partners to give an orientation to students about the work that they do.
Mm-hmm. And I see that's a problem. I see, it's my perceived problem. A lot of times when we mention this to they just say, okay, this today we're going to check a whole bunch of blood pressures and identify that somebody has high blood pressure, and then what? Or we're going to do some eye checks and physical exam, like health. We've all been to health fairs, right? Mm-hmm. Put on a t-shirt with those crazy university students, residents for one day. And that's kind of like where we end.
Right.
What's the next? Not that it's not real community engagement, it's a great tool. It might help somebody go set an appointment with their PCP tomorrow and take it there. But how do we take it to the next level?
Yeah. And it depends on what agency are you partnering with, and what are they going to do with that information? Do they have follow-up for that? Are there exercise classes or whatever? But finding those deeper opportunities for engagement might mean doing some more work around who you're partnering with, right? This idea of community as co-educator. I think oftentimes we only see that within the context of students going out to the community, but I want to challenge you to also invite community members in. So one of the things that I did at Laverne to sort of really highlight this was some of our community partners, they have master's degrees, they're eligible to teach in higher ed with that, particularly for undergrad. So worked with a community partner to develop a course that they taught, and they were paid as adjuncts. So they served as the instructor as well as the site supervisor, right, or the community partner. And so really acknowledging the knowledge that they have, and working with them to develop a course. And by the time I left, I think we had 16 courses that were taught by community partners. And so really, the first one we did was on community mental health. So we had the director of the local mental health organization develop a course that included topics on mental health first aid, and all of our students would get trained on that, as well as understanding the mental health system in California. We did a program with a local organization that was not an orphanage, but like a group home, a large group home, and they had a foster youth program, so we did a foster youth course. We did one on tutoring with the local after-school program at the public school. So we had a variety of different arrangements where we actually invited the community partners to be the instructors for the course. Again, asset-based community development as the model of engagement. And then the idea of credit is for learning, not service. So I would often have challenges with my faculty because they wanted to give students points for doing the service. Like you did 10 service hours, here's 10 points. And it's like, no, you don't give students points for just reading the book. It's about how they integrate that reading into the course materials. And so understanding that service should function as the same way as a text should, right? And that we give credit for the learning that takes place because of the service, not just for the service. Yeah. And this idea of community as intellectual space, right? That learning just doesn't take place within the walls of the university, but learning takes place in the community. And we need to let students know, and I think this is where the prep piece comes, that the classroom extends into the community. And you're not just there sort of with this, oh, let me go help, right, I'm going to do some good, but actually you go in there with an inquisitive mind that what am I going to learn from this experience. And so I think this pedagogy piece around all of these is part of the framing that we have to do with students before they go out into the community. And as faculty, we have to think about the work that they're doing with the community, because oftentimes this challenges the reality of the pressure that they receive from the university. And so figuring out how to navigate it for both students and faculty is the role that community engagement professionals, I think, play in this work. Any questions about this? All right, so just basic, the sort of components of service learning. You have the course content, meaningful service, and critical reflection. The reflection piece is really where that learning takes place, right? It's really where that synthesis, you're taking these two experiences, what you're giving in theory, what they're learning in the community, and bringing it together. That's where the questioning happens, and that's where the deep dive happens. And this then is the partnership between the student, the instructor, and the community partner. And so really being able to bring the community partner in at the beginning, maybe in thinking or sharing what the learning outcomes are, and how they can help support that when the students are at their site is really important. For me, when I was a community partner, I would always want to know what the learning outcomes were so that I could make sure I would place students in opportunities that they could sort of align with that or be available for them for reflection around, like, oh, I saw this happening in the classroom today, I don't understand why. And then being able, if I had the syllabus and I knew and I talked to the instructor, I could reinforce that. Okay. And then critical service learning. This comes out of work from Tania Mitchell, who's at the University of Minnesota. And sort of what has traditionally been the case in service learning, it's been learning to serve and serving to learn, right? This very sort of transactional piece, and I'm just going there to do good, and yay for me. And what she proposed in her piece around critical service learning is this idea, the critical piece means having and introducing a social change orientation. So the questioning of, like, what does the school funding look like from one neighborhood to another, or from one community to another? Why do we see disproportionate amount of arrests in certain communities than in others? So asking those questions, thinking about the redistribution of power, and developing authentic relationships with community partners and residents. And so thinking beyond just the, it's like if you're doing service at a soup kitchen, are you behind sort of serving the food, or are you doing that and sitting down and having conversations with people? Because when you're just serving the food, you're not going to get the stories, you're not going to understand, you're only going to see the transaction of that. When you're sitting, having conversation, eating with, right, being in community with, then that's really where that development of authentic relationships can take place, and also where you begin to think about the whys. Why does this exist in our society? And that's where that kind of reflection takes place. We want to get students to a place of critical thinking. I guess, again, now more than ever, it's important to do that. And so the ability to really ask the whys and have them themselves ask the whys, right? I remember my students would go from DePaul to my neighborhood, and they would take the bus on Western. And, you know, just being on a short 20-minute bus ride, you would see the differences. You would sort of the invisible borders that existed between certain neighborhoods, between neighborhoods of affluence and neighborhoods not as affluent. And the questioning of how that aligned with maybe the racial or ethnic background of a particular community. That's powerful for students to question and also reflect on in class, because thinking about not just jumping to conclusions, but understanding the reasons behind those sorts of things. So I believe that this critical service learning piece is essential in how we work with students to ask the questions why and delve deeper into that. In the practice piece, the pre-service I think is essential. Oftentimes I would have faculty come to me like 2 weeks before classes start, like, hey, I want to do service learning, can we? And sure, I can put something together, but that's not really best practices. It's really that pre-service. You want to be able to start maybe at least the semester before or the quarter before, and thinking about what the project may be, potential community partners, thinking about the learning objectives, how you're going to integrate it into assignments, right? Asking students to be able to reflect in the assignments or connect their learning, and then any risk management issues that you may have. When I went to Laverne, my risk manager had no clue about community engagement. I had to do a lot of education and provide him with a lot of resources because, universities tend to be risk adverse. And, this is the kind of work that stuff happens, and you have to be open and flexible. If you're a control freak, you probably should not do service learning because it's never going to go that way. And so that, I think, this pre-service helps to eliminate some of the challenges that may come up, but it doesn't, it doesn't get rid of all of them. In the service piece, so during the semester, contextualizing the relevance between, for the course, the documentation. So depending on what systems you may use, we used a system called GivePulse for students to track their hours and do reflections, orientation at the community site, and then engaging that critical reflection. And then the post-service would be any evaluation or assessment that you would do as part of it. So I like to sort of frame this in that way because I think it helps to break down the pieces to do a good project. Reflection, again, the reflection cycle, so this can happen, in one class, it can happen over the course of the semester, it can happen at the site. But it's the process of delivering meaning and knowledge from an experience that occurs before, during, and after service learning. So even framing the questions like, what do you think about this particular community? What's your experience with foster youth? Or what are your thoughts on foster youth? And then, so they do that before they go out. They're doing service with foster youth or at a group home. What's your experience during and then after, right? So having students be able to kind of piece where they were at before the service, during the service, and after the service, and doing that questioning. Any questions? Okay, I'm going to try to go. I'm not sure how much time I have left. But, these are the types of service learning. Depending on the institution you're at, you may have other ways that this is framed, but at least this is the way that we did it at DePaul. So the direct service is the face-to-face, like you're interacting with people. This could be the tutoring, helping at a homeless shelter, serving as a mentor for youth. But the direct service is that person-to-person interaction. Indirect service is more things that you're not necessarily interacting with people. You may be working at a community garden, you're doing some testing, you're doing something with Habitat for Humanity, but it's not that person-to-person interaction. The direct service, especially when you have students working with people, I think also requires additional sensitivity and making sure that students are oriented in a way that doesn't sort of replicate or cause harm. Particularly if they're working with youth and young people, especially if they're going to be there a very limited amount of time. So framing what that interaction will be, especially because young people develop bonds. And so, you're pieced out after 10 hours and the student has really developed a bond with you. And so being able to frame it in that way. And the advocacy piece. And so this really looks at projects, things around like, say, voter engagement, getting students registered to vote. There may be some legislation that students are interested in. And so thinking about what kind of advocacy projects, depending on the kind of course that you're teaching. I did a course where our students, the California State Legislature was going to cut Pell Grant or funding for college students with the Cal Grant. And so my students did an advocacy project doing letter writing campaigns, getting signatures to push the legislature not to make those cuts because they would be impacted by that. I had students doing a fossil fuel free campaign for the university's divesting from oil companies. And so those are kind of advocacy projects. There may be things around particular health care law or something, right? But these are different advocacy projects, and this is another type of engagement that students can do. And then research-based, right? So this involves working with local residents, maybe around a particular research project that they're interested in, and you're maybe doing needs assessments, finding, gathering, and reporting on information that can be beneficial for the community as they're maybe doing their own advocacy projects. Styles, we would have courses where service was required, so every student in the class did a certain amount of hours. We had service optional, so I would give the students the option to do it. The students who did it had to write like a paper that was maybe 5 pages. Students who didn't do it had to write a paper that was 10 pages and was a research project. But students had the option to do it. And then project-based. So it's not about the amount of hours that students complete, but it's about the deliverable that they give to the site. And oftentimes this is working in conjunction with the faculty. So we had a graduate business course on human resources, working with different nonprofits, looking at their human resource manuals and then offering up suggestions. And then the faculty supported it and made sure that the quality of the product that was given back was good. So community-based research. Well, was there any questions on the practice piece? Okay. I know I'm going fast. It's a lot. So community-based research is a collaborative between the academic researchers and non-academy-based community members that aims to generate social action and positive social change through the use of multiple knowledge sources and research methods. And so I know for me, in a role that I had at the university and in the community, this was really beneficial for us because we were able to commission the Voorhees Center at the University of Illinois Chicago to do some research for us that we were looking at 60 years after migration, the state of the Puerto Rican community in Chicago. And we were able to look at different indicators from education to health to community development, housing. And the indicators that we had from the health one helped us advocate the state legislature for funding to create a diabetes center in the community. And so the power of this research for the benefit of the community is really important. And so thinking about ways to connect that. The differences between sort of traditional research and community-based research. So thinking about, the goal, right? Advancing knowledge or addressing social need. Who raises the question, right? Existing work, literature reviews, versus community-identified needs, and the different types of presentation types and other things. Again, you'll receive this presentation. Publishing. So for faculty, this is, right, the publish-or-perish piece. And so we want to think about ways that we support the work that they're doing in the community. And I think through community-engaged scholarship is really an avenue to do that. So the idea of connecting their scholarship with their engagement for the purposes of engaged scholarship. And I'm sorry you can't see this very well, but there's the scholarship of teaching, so thinking about sort of looking at the teaching and learning piece, the research on service learning, scholarship of engagement, disciplinary scholarship arising from engagement, so the different sort of venues and avenues that faculty can publish on. So looking at, for the faculty around teaching and learning, the community's impact of research around partnerships, for the students, what the learning impact is, the institutions, thinking about the institutionalization of it and what it looks like in the institution, and then within the discipline. So education, social science, business, those sorts of things. And then the different places to publish. In the handout that you have in your folder, we've included a list of conferences. So those are places that you can present your work. There's a variety of different conferences. I think the ones that we listed are for the next year, year and a half, in different venues, either based on your discipline or ones that are broader. And then the different journals, and we put a list of those in the handout. And there are several book publishers. Stylus, Campus Compact has now become a publisher, so we're partnering with Stylus to commission research and publications. And so we're doing, I think, 3 publications a year. Our most recent one has been the one with Lena Distilio around the community engagement professional and looking at the competencies behind being a community-based professional. But there are opportunities to publish. There are opportunities to present. Most of these conferences also have journals attached to them. So CUMU, the Coalition of Urban and Metropolitan Universities, has a journal. You all are very lucky to be in this area. The Barbara Holland Collection is at UNO, and so there's a rich set of resources there. That's this one that's connected to CUMU. The Michigan Journal of Community Service Learning is another, and that's going under some change because the editor is retiring. Jeff Howard is retiring. The Journal of Public Scholarship in Higher Education, the Journal of Service Learning in Higher Education, the Irish Journal as well. And so there's a variety of different places to publish, and most of them, I think, are doing sort of one call a year, so it's important to pay attention to some of those deadlines, especially if you're going up for review anytime